Coming to paperback and e-readers, Isis Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Pre-order your copy of Isis Dark Incubus at Amazon.com and other online booksellers everywhere. Police found a pair of illegal migrant shelters inside of furniture stores inside the Bronx and Queens this week.
Some new information now after dozens of migrants were found living in a Queens basement.
And tonight we're getting a look inside the cramped living conditions with mattresses stacked from wall to wall, all happening inside a furniture store in Richmond Hill. CBS 2's Jennifer Bisram there live right now. She spoke with the owner. Jennifer.
Maurice and Christine, officials say over 70 migrants were living in the basement of a furniture store here in Richmond Hill, Queens, when they came to do an inspection. We did talk with the owner of that furniture store who was helping these migrants, and he says he was doing it because they had nowhere else to go. But city officials say all of those migrants were living there in unsafe conditions. Where did you sleep last night?
Last night, I sleep in the subway.
Over 70 migrants living in illegally converted sleeping quarters inside of a furniture store building in Queens. Cell phone video obtained by CBS 2 shows the migrants from Africa before the sweep in the cellar, at times sharing a meal.
Sometimes 10 days, 5 days, no shower, nothing. Wow. It's very difficult.
Ibu Sar provided the space, cots, and at times food. He says some migrants would give him up to $300 a month. In tears, he says they came to him for help after their 30-day shelter stay expired.
I've talked to landlords, people who are saying that these buildings is for the city. And the city is saying that they don't have no place for these people.
An inspection was done Monday after this neighbor made a complaint about people illegally living at the Liberty Avenue two-story mixed-use building and dozens of e-bikes improperly stored.
I don't know what's going on back there.
This is a video showing investigators with the FDNY and Department of Buildings going into the first floor of the store, behind the furniture where there were more migrants and beds, and according to officials, little to no plumbing and ventilation. A vacate order was since issued.
So you have to get rid of all the beds.
The owner insisting the living quarters was safe and migrants had access to 2 bathrooms and 2 exits.
There is no cooking, okay? We'll bring food, no cooking here.
The mayor responding Tuesday.
We have an obligation with DOB, FDNY, and all of our services to respond and take necessary action. That's what was done last night, and we're still looking at exactly what took place.
I'm so proud of these guys. That's why it broke my heart. I'm proud of them. They're all hard-working people.
And the Department of Buildings says 2 violations were given to the building owner, who is not the owner of that furniture store. It's still unclear what will happen to the owner of that furniture store, and it's still unclear where all of those migrants will go this evening. You heard we talked with a few of them who say they slept on the subway, they went to a few shelters, and they were all filled up. So that is still unclear at this hour. We are live in Richmond Hill, Queens. Jennifer Bisram, CBS 2 News.
All right, Jennifer, thank you.
Tonight, dozens of migrants found living in the basement of a store. Sound familiar? Well, we reported a similar story last night in Queens, and now the same thing in the Bronx. And it is the same guy who is housing the migrants. The city says it's illegal. Eyewitness News reporter Jim Dolan on where things stand tonight.
They are moving all they have in the world again. Dozens of migrants from West Africa paid $2,400 deposits and $300 a month to stay in a tiny retail space in squalid, dangerous, and illegal conditions. This man translated for one of the migrants.
He said the place is not good because the bathroom is outside. So anybody going to the bathroom, like you say, and then you're gonna go smell, and then whatever they use over there. What? So the bathroom is the condition is not good.
Inside there were 45 beds in the small, poorly ventilated space, and police say they were charging electric bikes and scooters inside. But the men paid their rent and had no idea they could be kicked out because the space was being used illegally.
He don't know about the law, so the only thing he know he have place to live because he's cold outside, you don't have no choice. You're gonna take it.
The owner of this space, who is taking rent here and taking substantial deposits here, owns another space in Queens that was also housing West African men. A vacate order was issued there yesterday, and the owner spoke with Eyewitness News, saying he was just trying to help.
The guys will be sleeping on the streets for days. So when they started coming to me, telling me their stories, I started helping them.
In the Queens space last night, there were 40 beds and 74 men with 2 bathrooms. Tonight, the men kicked out of this Bronx shelter stood on the streets, not sure what they would do next.
They kick them out, so they don't have no place to sleep. I'm wondering if the police is gonna leave them like that, or they're gonna take them to their shelter. That's what I just want to know.
Late tonight, some of the residents did board a bus that would take them to a legal shelter. The owner now faces zoning law violations.
Now, according to reports, 47-year-old Ibu Sarr, a West African immigrant, allegedly turned 2 of his businesses into makeshift migrant shelters. And according to reports, Ibu Sarr turned his furniture store in Richmond Hill, Queens, and his cell phone store in Kingsbridge in the Bronx into makeshift migrant shelters that housed 75 people in the basement of his Richmond Hill, Queens location and housed 47 people in his Kingsbridge Road location. And Ibu Sarr, as he was looking to make these makeshift migrant shelters, allegedly was looking to further expand that business further up into the Bronx by also allegedly breaking into the former Fordham Library and looking to convert that building into another migrant shelter before he was caught by police and allegedly arrested for trespassing. Now, most people wouldn't have known about Ibu Sarr's alleged makeshift migrant shelters had it not been for residents in Queens calling to complain allegedly about the smells that were coming from that furniture store and the fact that there were over 75 e-bikes parked outside of the building and being charged outside of the building. And once people saw that and started to see a part of the building being built up further over a neighbor's window, this is where the Department of Buildings allegedly came into that building and found the makeshift migrant shelter in Queens that held the 75 migrants and made an order to vacate, forcing all of those migrants to leave that location. And a couple of days later, they soon found another location that Ibu Sarr had on the first floor of his cell phone store. And in that location, they found over 47 migrants being housed in that location, where conditions were considerably worse than the ones in the Richmond Hill location. Now, according to reports inside of the Kingsbridge location, this makeshift migrant shelter was one where e-bikes were being charged inside of the building on home current, and in the Richmond Hill location, Ibu Sarr was allegedly looking to go and build an illegal extension onto that building without consulting the Department of Buildings over the window of a neighbor's home. Now, this whole situation with the Ibu Sarr's makeshift migrant shelters may appear on the surface to be noble, but it basically shows how the entire migrant crisis has gotten completely out of control from the Adams administration. Because what happened with the situation with these makeshift migrant shelters is a direct result of Eric Adams' reactionary policy to say that migrants could only stay in New York City's shelter system for 30 days. And because those migrants could only stay in New York City's shelter system for 30 days, they would have to try to find another place to stay. However, because many of these migrants do not have any place to stay, this leaves them open to what I believe to be opportunists like Ibu Sarr. And Ibu Sarr is not being noble as I see it, because what he's looking to do is try to go out here and capitalize on the policies of the Adams administration and enrich himself at the expense of all of these migrants who have no place to stay and have plenty of money from many of the off-the-books jobs that they are working illegally. And as they work these jobs illegally, he's looking to get paid by making them pay a $2,400 deposit, possibly in cash, and $300 a month to sleep in taking turns in the basement of that Richmond Hill furniture store and on the first floor of that Bronx furniture store, having to basically live in squalid conditions where they have to deal with locations where there is only 2 bathrooms in Queens. And in the case of the Bronx, in order for those migrants to use a bathroom, they have to be taking a membership at Planet Fitness that Ibu Sar establishes for them, and then use that Planet Fitness restroom facilities that are primarily made for the club members, but he's going to take advantage of this to make it a place for these migrants to be able to use a bathroom while he's going out here and making money at the expense of these migrants. And that basically shows how the entire situation with this migrant crisis is going to turn into a major catastrophe, because if we have a more opportunist like Ibu Sar out here, what they're possibly going to do is look to try to make money in the short term without ever thinking about the health and safety of their fellow brethren in the long term. Because when you have 75 men in a location, in a basement, that's basically a fire hazard, and it's a tragedy that's being set to happen, all because the Adams administration just will not admit that the sanctuary city policies that they look to go out here and follow just are a complete failure. And I have to wonder, do we need a tragedy on the level of Happy Land for the Adams administration and the New York City Council to realize that the sanctuary city policies are a complete failure? Because when I look at this situation with 75 migrants inside of that basement, it really reminds me of what happened in 1990 or 1991. I can't remember because I was in high school at the time, when Julio Gonzalez, who got kicked out of a Happy Land social club because his girlfriend didn't want to deal with him anymore, decided to get a gallon of gas from a gasoline station and decided to put it in front of the steps of the Happy Land social club and set it on fire. And that basically created a situation that led to the deaths of 87 people way back about in 1990 or 1991. And I have to wonder if Eric Adams wants to deal with that kind of tragedy, because if we continue on trying to maintain the sanctuary city policy that clearly is dysfunctional and just does not work, we may be dealing with a horrific tragedy where these individuals who are looking to try to find some sort of shelter will wind up creating a situation where a fire could possibly happen. And because this makeshift migrant shelter established by these opportunists doesn't have a rear exit or is meant to meet city policies as related to what the standards are for shelter are, we may wind up with a tragic situation that may lead to the deaths of dozens of people, and it will all be blood on Eric Adams' hands, because he is too busy trying to continue to try to virtue signal and continuing to try to get brownie points and social currency with people in the Biden administration who really don't want anything to do with him. I mean, this is a tragedy waiting to happen, and it's a tragedy waiting to happen because Eric Adams is too proud, and the city council are too proud, to sit there and admit that the policies established by Bill de Blasio and politicians before them as related to sanctuary city just do not work. And they do not work because you cannot provide sanctuary to people who enter the country illegally, because the city just does not have the finances or the resources to take care of individuals who have entered the country illegally. No, the city just is not equipped to do this, and that's why this job needs to be given back to those in immigration's customs and enforcement, because individuals in immigration's customs and enforcement, known as ICE, they have the federal resources to be able to, one, vet these individuals, and 2, they have the resources provided by the federal government to be able to take care of these individuals and make sure that their health, safety, and welfare are taken care of. Because while some would say, oh, an ICE shelter is horrible, it's a lot safer than being in somebody's basement, and it's a lot safer than being in somebody's basement, because in somebody's basement, a basement is only made to be a place where only a handful of people can dwell at any given time. It does not have the facilities to be able to care for multiple individuals. No, a basement is basically a place where maybe 4, 5, or 6 people can go and walk and have air and be able to stay in that place for a minute. And when it comes to that kind of place, they're not going to look to stay there permanently. No, it's a place where you just come and go. And in that place, there are bathrooms and facilities just for a small amount of people. Whereas in an ICE shelter, there are facilities for these individuals to take care of large groups of individuals, and also facilities to make sure that their health and hygiene are taken care of, and also people on hand to make sure that they are not carrying communicable diseases or creating squalid conditions where communicable diseases can be transmitted. And in the case of Ibu Sarr's alleged trespassing to try to further expand his business, there's when it comes to an ICE shelter is a lot safer than a building that has been abandoned by the city. And a ICE shelter is a lot safer than these places, and a lot safer to care for those migrants. So the city basically is doing a disservice by continuing to be proud and continuing to try to say they're going to try to maintain these policies. And in the case of Eric Adams, basically sitting here trying to say he can't do anything about this whole sanctuary situation and doesn't want to do anything about this sanctuary city situation. But it's clear to me that this sanctuary city situation is a clear and present danger to the health and safety of all New Yorkers. And it's a clear and present danger because, again, when you have dozens of individuals inside of a confined space, whether it be the first floor of a building or the basement of a building, all it takes is one fire, and that fire could basically lead to the deaths of dozens of individuals, whether it be by a malfunctioning e-bike battery or a malfunctioning hot plate, or just something going wrong where somebody gets into a beef with somebody else and decides to participate in some sort of violence like Julio Gonzalez did in 1990 or 1991. You're dealing with an extremely dangerous situation, and I really fear that we possibly may have to deal with a great tragedy for everybody in New York to concede that this whole sanctuary city policy is a complete failure, because this sanctuary city policy, as I see it, basically is like a ticking time bomb, and it's going to end in a great tragedy because many of our politicians have their heads up their asses and they're sitting there looking to avoid accountability for a situation they basically created because they got in their feelings about Donald Trump, and they got in their feelings about ICE, not about ICE doing its job, saying that ICE is racist, even though we clearly see that the Department of Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement have a job that needs to be done, and all we've seen is people impeding Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement from doing their job in dealing with people who enter the country illegally, and all that's doing is opening up doors for opportunists like this to try to create these illegal shelters, further increasing the crime here in New York City, because as you have individuals entering spaces illegally and trespassing on spaces to create migrant shelters, this creates further takes the quality of life in New York City in a further decline. Now, the quality of life in New York City had gone into a state of decline under the de Blasio administration, and it continues to further go into a state of decline under an Adams administration. And the Adams administration has turned the city from being a place where we're getting into the chaos of the 1970s and 1980s into a place that's even worse than that, because when you have individuals who are looking to go out here and take advantage of that situation with people who entered the country illegally, we have a situation that's gotten out of the control of local government and shows us why local government has no business in the business of trying to take care of those who enter the country illegally, because this clearly is a situation where we need immigration's customs and enforcement to basically take all of these individuals out of the city and place them in a facility where they can get the care that they need, get their paperwork taken care of, and be in a place where they can be looked after and supervised. We really need immigration's customs and enforcement to deal with this situation, because it's clear the city is in way over its head, and with opportunists looking to take economic advantage of these migrants, they are being put in the same place that they were when they tried to cross the border. Basically, a lot of these migrants came into the country because they paid to get in, and now they're working off the books jobs and being taken advantage by more predators. So this situation is getting progressively worse, but you can't explain that to those on the far left who want to believe that we can take care of everyone, but we clearly can't, because if you have opportunists taking advantage of policy changes made by Eric Adams, we clearly see that the city is in over its head. And sadly, we're heading and spiraling to a tragedy, because if this is just one guy taking advantage of the situation that's been exposed, there are far more out there. And I would hate to see a loss of life on the level of the Happy Land Social Club to happen for many New Yorkers to realize that the whole concept of Sanctuary City is turning the city into Arkham Asylum. Arkham Asylum, where we don't really see the politicians leading, but we see the inmates running the asylum, and they're making the entire city into a place that only the insane would want to stay. Because when you have people creating squalid conditions, that creates conditions where we're going to see the increase in vermin like rats and roaches, and we're also going to see the filth in the streets, because none of these buildings were designed to house that many people. And we have to just go out here and concede that this policy, this unconstitutional sanctuary city policy, is a failure, and that when it comes to things of the federal government, we need to have the federal government doing their job, because it's the job of the federal government to deal with those who enter the country illegally. It's the job of the federal government to be able to handle this situation, and the city just needs to understand that de Blasio's backwards sanctuary city law that says that the city can't do anything with ICE is a complete failure, and again unconstitutional, because again it violates the super supremacy clause of the Constitution. And we just need people on the left to just concede this is not about left or right, but this is about understanding a policy that just is a failure, even worse than prohibition and jab mandates. It's a policy failure because you cannot go out here and take care of those who enter the country illegally, because if they violate the federal borders, they will believe they can violate state and local laws. And that's basically what this guy did with this illegal migrant shelter, showing us why we need to set a hard boundary as related to our federal laws and our federal borders, because this is a threat to not only national security, it's a threat to local security and safety, because again, all it takes is one fire and we could be dealing with one of the greatest tragedies in American history, and many of those blue politicians will finally be embarrassed to the point where they realize that they have basically screwed up royally, and again, basically, because these guys are thinking about getting reelected, they're not thinking about the overall picture of what their job is to do, because their oath was to go out here and, one, defend the Constitution, and two, defend the lives of the local residents and protect those local residents, and that's not being done because of backwards policies from Eric Adams, which allow opportunists like this to come in and take advantage of those who entered the country illegally and put the safety of New York citizens at risk with their dysfunctional policies and their pride, because this is all about pride. And what's really sad is it may take all of that pride to lead to a great fall. And again, I really am scared about that fall, because people might wind up losing their lives in a great tragedy, but nobody's really thinking about that because everybody's in their feelings about Donald Trump. And because they're in their feelings about Donald Trump, they're not thinking critically about what they're doing here in New York as related to this overall migrant crisis, again, created by greed, created by ego, and created by arrogance and pride. That's why we have this whole situation, and this situation is getting progressively worse, and it's getting progressively worse because, sadly, those like Eric Adams put social currency of virtue signaling over the health and safety of all of us here in New York. Now, if you want to see me be able to make more videos like this, you can send a donation to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up some of my positive black fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, you can find those books on Amazon.com in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find them at other online booksellers like Draft to Digital, Google Play, Barnes & Noble, Walmart, and Target. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Coming to paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, Illuminati. The man who rules the world takes on the head of the global elite in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes series adventure. Pre-order your copy of John Haynes, Illuminati on Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Now available in paperback and e-readers, ISIS, All About the Goddess. The Goddess Next Door bears all in the art studio to catch a campus stalker in this action-packed ISIS series mystery. Get your copy of ISIS, All About the Goddess in paperback and e-readers at online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.